Several years ago, on a beautiful day in June, I packed a lunch and went on a solo trip to a mountain stream out in the mountains. The lunch was very simple, but I won't describe that. But I went and parked and crossed a little bridge and sat on a beautiful rock that had the folds, the geological folds that geologists know quite well, and they can tell that it's an intrusion, a volcanic intrusion or whatever. But the rocks around me were just glorious. And I'm sitting on a rock, beginning to eat a sandwich, and I look across the stream. The stream, by the way, is just beautiful. And I see a horse van pull up. It's about, what can I say, 4 horses long, closed on the sides, pulled by a Dodge Ram truck that's the biggest that they make. And this is curious. I'm out here to watch nature. Humans are part of nature. So I look at it, and I notice that a man gets out, puts on a cowboy hat. He's in a starched shirt with creases on the arms, creases on the legs. He walks back to the end of the van, and he must be married to a trophy wife because he kissed her, or she kissed him. They open the back of the van, help a horse out, and this horse is really decked out. It's already saddled. It has saddlebags on it. It has a scabbard. The man goes to the back of the truck and gets out a very expensive rifle and puts that in the scabbard. He has a holster on his right side. He is really decked out. And I think, well, I wonder, what's he going to kill? Why is he so decked out with armament? And then he gets on the horse, grandly looks at his wife, crosses the bridge, sees that he can't go left on the bridge where I'm sitting, and there's no path, and he turns right, and he continues on straight ahead for about, what would I say, 40 yards. And then he runs into a locked fence, and he looks to the left. I can see his hat move, and there's a fence that goes right up this mountain. And he looks to the right, and the fence goes right down to the creek, and there's all kind of brambles. And he pauses, and then he puts the horse in reverse, I guess you could say, and they start backing out, and then he gradually turns around. I get up, and I know the Colorado Trail passes right there, so I say, now here is what you have to do, sir. And I have my half-eaten sandwich in one hand. I said, you need to go under the bridge right here, and you might need to take your hat off because it's not too high. And then you go around following the trail, and I will tell you that there has been a rock slide up a little further, but if you go at the angle of the trail and cross the rock slide, you will pick up the trail quite easily. The rock slide is about 75 yards wide. Now this grand cowboy man looks at me and seems to take me in a glance and nods. That's all I got from him, was a simple little nod. I guess he saw I was a peasant. And he goes down. I see him doff his hat and go under the bridge, grandly place his hat back on, and head on the trail. Well, you and I have been on a journey for the last 8 lessons or 8 chapters in this series. And I began with emotions, and I gave you a warning that you had to doff your hat, because instead of being confused and facing fences in life, emotions, sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender, give the melody of daily life, but they also give the access to old constraining factors from childhood. So you have to doff your hat. And there are other problems along the journey. There's a rock slide, so to speak. By the way, that's a very true story. I did not change one thing on that. But we have a rock slide ahead of us if we go on the journey that I recommend in these chats. We run into the abandonment fears that children have, adolescents have, and grown-ups have in different ways. And the abandonment fear ruins us in some ways because it can make cowards of us, and it can make us compromise beyond what is good for integrity, beyond what is good for your identity, beyond what is good for a marriage. And then, before we get across the rock slide, we have to go around a major bunch of boulders, that there are modules in the human brain and in the dynamic unconscious. Things will bubble out of us, like that 10-year-old boy who was gleeful about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Where did that come from in a little boy's personality? I guess it's an old reflex back in history because it's been the source of wars and violence. Whenever we get backed up, we flip into some part of the reptilian brain. And then I went to presuppositions, which I developed along with my wife, because people were saying, well, what can I do with my children? And they weren't in therapy. I said, teach them sachet, the 6 emotions. And I said, but also you can tell them who they are. Now this is phenomenal. But people have no soul mirror, and they learn who they are from the comments of others. Yes, they learn from experiences. Yes, they learn across the years and the developmental phases that they go through. But they also learn from words. And I taught those words, I taught those procedures to a lot of people. And I wish I could tell you the grandchildren of the people who listen to us about presuppositions, the children. But they are still alive. And the other people that I mentioned across here, with the exception of the adolescent boy who you'll never discover who he was, all the others are deceased. And finally, in these first 5 principles of liberation psychotherapy, I talked about life force energy and how that motivates us, and how I knew, my wife knew, that each person we saw wanted to grow. And that was beautiful because it was not only that person and us cooperating with them, it was also within. They had a drive to grow. And I've heard many, many stories about people who went through horrible crises, and as they tell me about them, they're upset. And they're upset because they want to live. And that force was a great ally in psychotherapy. And then after the 5 principles and the introduction, we went to how tragedy can inform values, because something happens that people, I saw it yesterday on television, people in Syria were running from homes, a 3rd largest town in Syria, and they were carrying bags, and they were carrying children, and they were helping one another. They huddled behind a United Nations car. There was enormous tragedy. Snipers were shooting at them, and they worked together as a group, the family of man. And that's what I wanted to teach my grandchildren and each viewer of these chats, that there is this grand impulse within to be redemptive, to help, to love, to do anything you can, whether you're with Doctors Without Borders or wherever. I've tried to give a perspective during these lectures, and as I thought, as we come to the end of all of them, several of my old teachers came to mind. One was Dr. Bernard Loomer at the University of Chicago, the very good philosophy teacher I had. And he used, since he was teaching in a divinity school, he used the phrase, the kingdom of God. And on one occasion he said, the kingdom of God is like a spider web around the earth. Just little strands all over the earth. Very thin, but very tensile strands. And that is the people that I address, the people who want to come out of their values. And those strands, those very thin strands around the earth, are, whether or not you call them the kingdom of God or the redemptive people, or just the good people who choose out of their own mindset that, by golly, they will live for life. So I've given you emotions in all those lectures, and I've given you astronomy, and I've given you biology and the great story that we have. We are part of life on this planet. Narcissism is dead. And then I thought of another person who influenced me, a man who died of cancer, Dr. John Schultz, who encouraged us to adopt a child in Guinea. And I think what he said is all we do is help children, when he went and talked to one of these warlords, these dictators, these generals of hate and violence and destruction, these men that are terrified within and try and push their terror out on others. All we do is help children. Well, I think the great values can be summed up in John's phrase, all we do is help children. So I implore you to have written on as your epitaph, all I did was help children, the children of the stars.